Right beside old Unit 3 sits a shell-marked waste you see. Tanks of resin stacked with care, holding what the pumps caught there. TEPCO field, two plans to show. One says yes, the other no. Each awaits a coming call. Neither clears the path at all. So they say, when the work might get underway. Decommission down the line, mid-century's hopeful sign. 880 tons remain, none retrieved from 3's domain. They debate what space to claim, still the Buildington stays the same. From Unit 2, a careful shot, not from 3, not from 4. Still they work around the door, less than a gram. Still asking for more.
Hello everybody, welcome back. Find a number in the comments section. Thank you, Dana. And you can find that song. It's the second last song that James has posted. The link is in the description. It's amazing graphics on that. And I downloaded that copy, so it's not going to be as high quality. Hello everybody, welcome back. We got another amazing show for you tonight. This story showed up today, this morning. It's the first story I seen when I started into the news cycle. It's a typical morning routine, right? And it was a long day. Unfeasible Fukushima decommissioning schedule will cause residents anxiety. Unfeasible Fukushima decommissioning schedule. This was the picture that they were showing. Always takes me a minute to get up to speed, or longer, who knows. There's reactor 3. The next one is reactor 2. Then the next one is reactor 1. And we got a live feed. We bring up the live feed out of curiosity. Just got daylight, I think, down there. Here comes the live feed. That's reactor 2. And right there. Starting images of unit, the stream from the side of unit 1, and from the side of unit 4. I forget how to get reactor 4 up there. There's 2 streams. So the camera is right there. You see the red dot? One's looking at the back side towards the ocean of unit 1. And the other, from the same spot, for some stupid reason, is looking at the back side of reactor 4. Why are they showing us reactor 4? So this is supposed to be a live stream you're looking at. Oh yeah, here we go. So this would give us the side of Unit 4. And of course, if you watched last night's show, you know how crazy that statement actually is. And the trust to Tokyo Electric Power Company is the definition of unaware. It's approximately 30-second delay. But we've seen the times where we assumed that they were restreaming from a different day, a different month, or even a different year. Should nuclear plants be declared biological weapons due to perpetual fuel pool radioactive fallout? Should nuclear plants be declared biological weapons due to perpetual fuel pool radioactive fallout? So the radioactive fallout is in the 50s. Doctors declared it or described it as a biological weapon because of its effects upon your body. So a biological weapon has a certain effect upon your body, right? But nuclear is much worse, radioactive fallout. And so all the fuel pools from nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation. They're splitting atoms directly into the environment. They can't be contained. And so when you think about the censorship I got last night, imagine what I'm going to get tonight. Because these polls are, if you go back through all my polls, you can really get an insight into this criminal empire known as nuclear. The governments, parliaments in Canada, the Congress, Senate in the United States, the Diet in Japan, cannot regulate the industry. Only the nuclear regulatory of each country can regulate the industry and make it illegal to poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation. And so this is why they can murder your loved ones in the hospitals. This is why they can severely damage permanently so many people, because Congress, parliaments, and like in Japan, the equivalent is known as a diet. They don't have the authority. And then each nuclear regulatory commission is appointed by the current administration, whatever president or prime minister is in power, will appoint their own member team, which is typically 3 to 5 member team for nuclear regulatory commissions. And they regulate it. And they're usually the ghouls of the industry for many decades, and that's why they got that particular job, because there's no way they're going to make it illegal to poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation. And so you can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it, 200 million atoms on the head of a needle. But a single atom in your body pulls an energy at the speed of light every second. The body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells and eventually builds a tumor around it. And so the cancer epidemic started in the early 70s after all the open-air nuclear testing. All the underground testing split the earth open, so everything was vented into the environment. So there was no containment for the nuclear war. They called it nuclear testing, but it's the same weapons, the same radioactive fallout, and the same adverse side effects. The human body doesn't care if it was done in anger or the animals. And every species with replicating cells, there's neither species, rather, with replicating cells that has an autoimmune trigger that can defend against man-made anthropogenic radiation. So our bodies are acclimated to the elements from the solar system, right? We're already acclimated to that through genetic superior selection. That's why we exist. We live in harmony, and we utilize, the natural so-called emitters. They conflated natural ones with man-made ones. You can't make nuclear weapons or dirty bombs out of natural stuff like bananas, potato chips, and stuff like that. You can only do that with the man-made radiation. So originally when they were created, it's a very secretive industry. But anyway, that's why we got the poll. Should nuclear plants be declared biological weapons due to perpetual fuel pool radioactive fallout? Now, we just had an unusual event on our planet in Russia. We had estimates are varying 6, 7, and 8. I think the consensus is 7 volcanoes have went off in just, I think it's a 24-hour or less period. That's extraordinary. We've never seen anything like that. And the Kamchatka Peninsula, where they had the recent massive earthquake, just had another massive 8.8 earthquake. And there is connotations there could be another tsunami. And then I was watching a video tonight of a tsunami from a few days ago on the Kamchatka Peninsula, which reached almost 250 feet tall. There was a guy with his pet dog on a mountain, and the tsunami, there was 3 waves that he only shot a little video because he was running away. 3 waves, one on top of each other. It was incredible. It was like you can see the ocean go out, which is typical of your tsunamis. And then you see 3 waves coming in, huge waves too. And they actually breached the top of that 250 foot, we'll call it a hill, I guess, because the mountain is much higher, I'm assuming. We'll call it, that's a long way up. And when the 3rd wave come in, he started running because he realized, because you can see it's a very grainy video, but it was legitimate. I hope everybody's doing good. And so, just let me jump back and forth for a second, because doctors in the 50s described radioactive fallout as a biological weapon. And so you have to protect the species, and the females of the species in particular, for anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. And that's particularly for humans too, right? Because females are born with all their eggs, and men produce them, right, forever. But females are actually born with all their eggs. And so this is why doctors are concerned, the same as myself, as you've heard me obviously many times over the years, remind you that we have to protect the female species on this planet from the radioactive fallout. And so radioactive fallout, I want to talk about that for a second. I'm going to come back to the volcanoes in a moment. The radioactive fallout, so you got gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas. And think of an invisible snowstorm. And the only problem with nuclear is it's such a complicated subject for the average person. And you can't just learn about it by reading a couple of paragraphs from an apologist, which is all you're really going to find out there, right? And so what I generally do is I like to provide the documentations for most of my assertions, because this is an educational program. You can't run an educational program without giving you the ability to rationalize what I'm saying, right? Just let me get that up and running. How's everybody doing today? So the earthquake, I'll show you a couple of different models. Let me show you 3 different models from Fukushima, from different government institutions. We'll come back to this pictures story in a moment. Okay, so you got this model here, this depiction right here is Xenon-133. No, this was cesium-137 from Stanford University, based on 468 hours, 19.5 days of radioactive fallout. So it's a continuous plume covering the whole planet from Japan. This is another model, and I can't remember this particular model. Was it cesium? Was it iodine-131 or something like that? This model was the French government of cesium-137, which pulses energy 600 feet per second. 600 feet every second, almost at the speed of light. So think of a snowstorm covering the planet, and this model is based on 31 days. So you got 20 days right there. So think of a snowstorm covering the whole planet in 20 days. The snow never melts and it never stops snowing. That the planet would get right away. Everybody would be up in arms, right? I don't know, the power plant broke down, and now the whole planet is going to be covered in snow 1,000 feet deep over the next couple of years, because you wouldn't be able to avoid it, right? Everybody have to get snow blowers and all the other stuff. But radiation is invisible, but it's the only emission, anthropogenic man-made emission, or even volcanic or anything else, where the plume covers the whole planet. And you can't see it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or perceive it. But the problem is your body doesn't have an autoimmune trigger. And so you can't just have cesium-137. This is at 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. Right, so this is airborne, but it's also symmetrically from the surface to the troposphere. This is a continuous plume covering the entire planet. And if everybody on Earth was to notice, then that would be the death of the nuclear industry immediately. And I mean, it would be chaos. So in that same plume, right, you're going to have xenon that's cesium-137 too, I do believe. And we have all kinds of models of different isotopes, right? And so each plume would have the inventories of different isotopes. So you're going to have, we have the studies, right, of iodine-131s, iodine-129. For every iodine-131, there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more iodine-133, 31 times more iodine-129. And you have xenon plumes, we have plutonium plumes. I'll show you in a second. We have americium, neptunium plumes, etc., etc. You have all these studies, documentation showing the fallout and the quality and the quantity of it. And just I'll give you one more example. The neptunium-239, that's 20 days of radioactive fallout. That decays to plutonium in 2.5 days. Every 2.5 days, 1/10 of it will decay to plutonium-239. So after 25 days, the neptunium would have decayed to plutonium, which has a 24,000-year half-life. There's 10 half-lives. And plutonium-239 kills all the animals, particularly the beagle dogs and puppies. When they're allowed to live out their life, they'll die of multiple tumors. The majority of the tumors are bone tumors. But with plutonium, you'll also get liver tumors and lung tumors. And some of the animals would die of competing tumors. But the human kidney is 50 times less efficient than the animal kidney at filtering plutonium. So humans are 50 times more vulnerable than the animals, and every animal died and the studies we typically show you is from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, which is the U.S. Navy's. And Dr. Raymond Gilmedy was typically the lead author in those studies, right? Okay. So calling it a biological weapon is appropriate because your body is under siege from white blood cells attacking the source. And because it's in your body pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second, the body tries to repair the damage to your chromosomes, your DNA, and your cells every second. It can't keep up with that, by the way. And it attacks the source all of this with white blood cells trying to build what in its version is a sarcophagus, we call it a tumor, which could take a long time to manifest and get diagnosed and everything else. And so for every white blood cell you're producing in order to carry out those tasks, which is an enormous amount, you're not producing a red blood cell, and the red blood cell carries oxygen and nutrition. So this is true for all the species. And so currently we have 13,000 gray whales left. And last year, all of them were on a southerly migratory 12,000-mile run were emaciated. So they were starving to death. Severe emaciation, you can see their rib cages, spinal column, peanut head. You can count the vertebrae on their backs, etc., etc. Severe emaciation. This year they're headed north on 12,000. Now there was no surviving babies last year made it to the southerly breeding grounds, which is Baja California. But we're seeing this symmetrically throughout the whale species. And I have another die-off show. We produced 2 in the last couple of weeks. But we have another die-off video ready to go. And we just last Thursday we had done a die-off video showing all the emaciated animals, and so now we're seeing an acceleration. So radioactive fallout can best be described and easily quantified as a biological weapon, and that because we don't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against it, and that the most vulnerable of society is the female species, then we need desperately to protect the female species of the 8 million species. We need to protect the human population, the female population, from the radioactive fallout, and that's not going to happen. This industry has a stranglehold on humanity and the future of humanity, and we are in real trouble on this planet. And so these shows are basically a lighthouse for humanity that is being denied to humanity, a terrible warning of what is now playing out. Fukushima was a pulse event. At the top of each of the reactors could have been in the 2 fuel pools around 8 reactor cores. Each of the reactor cores were pure uranium plutonium. And see, Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. It was a brand new reactor. And they didn't have fuel pools stored at the top of the buildings. Now, this is the Stumper reactor 4. Officially, this never happened. The official story, even though you can get this at TEPCO's website or the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has no sovereignty over any country, by the way, which is United Nations, was formerly known pre-Nagasaki Hiroshima as League of Nations. And it's a bunch of oligarchs, maybe, I guess is a word we can use, very influential countries and players that have a stranglehold on humanity for the most part by controlling governments through different venues, right? And I'm not going to go down that road, but United Nations have a subsidy company, so to speak, organization / company, for just about every facet of the human experience. And, the first peacekeeping role the United Nations done was in North Korea. And millions dead, millions missing, millions of refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans. And that was called a police action, but it was clearly a slaughter. And it looks like they wanted the minerals to their country and the coastline, maybe, right? And so there's been used. They were captured by Japan for 50 years before that. And so Japan left, and then the United Nations, we're talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then the United Nations, or League of Nations, changed the name to the United Nations, and its first act was a police action. And you've probably seen it like on MASH, which was a public relations stunt to demonize North Korea for fighting for its sovereignty. And so now they've been ostracized for 74 years, I think. We've done their last anniversary. We'll do it this year, most likely. So for 120 plus years, North Korea has been enslaved for 50 years by Japan and now by United Nations, which is just 195 militaries, according to Eisenhower. And according to George Bush Sr., in one of his most famous speeches, which I play regularly, is the League of Nations, right? All right, let's keep going here. Tokyo Electric Power Company has revised the schedule for decommissioning the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, which was hit by nuclear, they won't put that there, so I had to dig up the word, meltdowns. So they're very, saying the word nuclear meltdown will get you censored for most of the internet. Unless there's guardians out there who will. And so this show we do here, and the research expeditions that we carry out and have carried out for many, many years now, is, I'm the only guy on the planet, unfortunately, terrifyingly, that is producing an educational program in history. Nobody else has ever come out and challenged the nuclear industry because it's monolithic. It has almost complete control over your universities through a secrecy act in the 50s and 60s, especially during the Manhattan Project, right? They had tens of thousands of scientists, and they had tens of thousands of spies spying on the scientists, all through a secrecy act where they were funded, but was never acknowledged publicly, right? Even though it is now. And then there was tens of thousands of spies spying on the tens of thousands of spies that were spying on the tens of thousands of scientists during the Manhattan Project. And there was tens of thousands of other spies spying on the tens of thousands of spies. And I'm not kidding you, I'm not making this up, I'm not exaggerating it, I'm not misrepresenting it. And so that funding never went away. There's still, that whole entity still exists today, but who knows what it's being used for, right? It's a very secret organization, right? Anybody who looks at the nuclear industry, they're considered, to get put on a watch list, and they have all kinds of ways. So, like for instance, La Hague in France has 500 security guards. This is a reprocessing facility. But why would you need 500 security guards at one of these facilities? Because the toxicity of the material we're talking about is impossible. It melts your organs, so it's impossible to steal, right? Even for a tiny amount. They just didn't want anybody within proximity with Geiger counters or cameras. And they didn't want field studies produced in those areas because they would see the toxicity in the soil and the rivers and the lakes and everything else. And so almost every single nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, because they can't contain the emissions from the fuel pools. And so when you take a reactor core out of a reactor, it's producing the same atoms as it did to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses. And just trying to quantify how many atoms it takes to boil a glass of water is a Google type number. Google is a word for numbers, right? It's a very large number. To boil water for 1 million homes and businesses for 1 hour is more anthropogenic man-made atoms than all the grains of sands and all the beaches on the planet and all the stars considered in the universe, by orders of magnitude. And so this stuff is released into the biospheres where it's sucked up by the ecosystem. And in increments over 80 years, it's caused a permanent downward spiral. It broke the food chain. Now, Fukushima happened was a pulse event. So you had 4 reactor buildings with 8 fuel pools. Each fuel pool was full of reactor cores. And I apologize, I'm just going to apologize a little bit about always telling, not always telling, but I guess telling, always trying to reinforce these particular facets of the nuclear industry, keep that front and center, because when your brain is trying to work out what's going on, then this gives you a unique ability to be accurate, right? The idea is to create millions of people like me that are articulated and can quantify their assertions. This is why I provide documentation. So let's keep rolling here. In the March 2011 nuclear disaster, not nuclear meltdowns, but nuclear disaster. Disaster is not the appropriate word when it comes to nuclear. It has its own spectrum. It's a very, well, like the radioactive fallout is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Right, so it shouldn't exist. There should be incredible laws to to control this industry, right? It shouldn't be allowed to exist. You can't control the emissions from 1,000 fuel pools. Each one is boiling about 120,000 liters into the environment each day because it's splitting atoms. And now that we're so far down the road, the fuel pools at the top of these reactor buildings, there's usually 2 at least at each building, not counting common span fuel pools, where they take fuel from all the reactors, but they have to store it in the pool for a decade, sometimes longer than that, before they can move it to another fuel pool. It's splitting atoms with no containment. It's the worst case scenario. And so one of our biggest fears is we would find a planet with 8 million species on it. And then the industry would put a nuclear reactor there and eventually, because you don't need a nuclear meltdown to eventually exterminate all the species, you just need the fuel pools splitting atoms. Each fuel pool emissions into the environment is catastrophic. To have 1,000 of them worldwide. So before the nuclear industry come along, our biodiversity was insane. It was amazing. Our wildlife was amazing. And in 80 years, when not only Fukushima, which was a pulse event, broke the food chain, our species now are catastrophically impacted, right? And the research expeditions we carried out from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years basically shows an extinction event. We snuffed out very highly visible species, like 480 species of worms, 80 species of starfish, there was 80-something species of sea anemones. Each of these species, by the way, came in multiple vibrant colors. 5,500 invertebrates were disappeared from the 700 algae. These were named and defined by institutions. And so the cover-up was just really something you wouldn't have imagined even today. It's hard to comprehend. It's hard to accept what I'm telling you is true, right? And if you have a hard time accepting what I'm telling you is true because you're new here, that would be normal. But because we can easily quantify every one of our assertions because it's an educational program. That's the only thing we can do. We have to quantify everything. Clinging indefinitely to a non-feasible decommissioning schedule is irresponsible and heightens the anxiety of the residents waiting for the region to recover. You can't recover after a nuclear accident. The radioactive fallout, because it's so small, is assimilated into every species. And because it doesn't get along with any species, it's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, it destroys the integrity of everything, including the soil. And but in particular, the fungus and the bacteria. This is why we're seeing wildfires and forest fires get out of control, because when you kill the bacteria and the fungus in your forest, which is what soaks up the water and allows, and you need the bacteria and the fungus for the biota. You need the bacteria, the fungus, the biota to break down the foliage and the litter. That's the cycle of life in the meadows and the forest. And so when you destroy the fungus and the bacteria, which soaks up maintains the water for the roots and everything else, and the biota, then the foliage and the litter doesn't break down. The ground becomes tender dry. You don't have a functional ecosystem. The roots are still able to bring up moisture because they're down pretty deep, but it's no longer a functional system. And the pollen becomes radioactive, and this is why we see a massive decline. Now, there's lots of chemicals and everything else that has contributed to this, but nothing contributes to it quite the way that the nuclear industry, radioactive fallout do, because it pulses energy almost at the speed of light every second. And cesium can pulse at 600 feet, for instance, and there's many emitters just like it. And so the forest fires is the foliage and litter not breaking down and traveling 500,000 feet, big flames, and then settling down into tender, dry areas. And when you do get rain, because the ground now is so dry, it's generating heat, which contributes to the storms being much more severe. But it contributes to flash floods, which is something we predicted a long time ago. We see a massive increase in flash floods. And then, because it killed the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain, And phytoplankton is not just in salt water, it's in fresh water too. You have a lot less oxygen, but it takes a while for that to manifest because the ecosystem is so big, right? But it'll manifest in many different ways. You see a lot more. You expect to see a lot more road rage, or say ear rage, up higher because there's less oxygen. You expect to see a lot more road rage because there's less oxygen, and you see a lot more mental health things showing up, right? Expect to see absurd amount of you'll see a massive increase in heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. So, like, the first study is going to do is autism and Down syndrome after a nuclear accident. That should tell you everything you really need to know. But because when it's in your body is under siege with white blood cells, so you have a lot less oxygen in your body, which you need to repair damage, by the way, and nutrition. And so what happens is, with less oxygen, so when you drink alcohol and you get really drunk, that's because you're displacing oxygen. Well, radiation is a permanent thing where you're always producing the white blood cells for the rest of your life. It's not a cut where your body heals it. I know what some of you are probably saying, Dana. You're off track. I was going to do all these stories tonight. But it's been heavy on my heart and mind. Now, because we have the bioaccumulation in all the species and humans, and my heart is broken because I see the health impacts post-Fukushima catastrophic. So in Japan, there was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. It was 13,646. Not everybody got health care, by the way. Not everybody was diagnosed. It's not just cancer. But 865,000 extra cancers in the first year is, oh my goodness, stuff. And, there's lots of these studies where you had 13,646 out of 38,200 children with thyroid tumors of around 2 centimeters. The child's thyroid tumor is only around 2 by 3 centimeters. And so they're producing radioactive hormones through their developing life. Now, this is going to be even worse for the species, by the way. But for children, and it used to be 1 in a million. So it's like 356,000 out of a million when you scale it up. When it used to be 1 in a million Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, 2011. And they're producing radioactive hormones, and they got tumors. What that means is you can't have, which is a gamma, you can't just have the gamma. You're going to have the alphas, neutrons, the betas, and equal amounts or even worse. Which means they're producing radioactive stem cells because their skeleton is going to be brutalized by plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, bone seekers. So they're producing radioactive hormones for the rest of their lives because of their thyroid and their adrenaline, of course, and their pituitary gland in their brain is dependent upon the hormones, right? They store those hormones from the thyroid gland. So you got all these radioactive hormones, and the bones are producing the stem cells. So for the developing species, and for children, for instance, which, like a 20-year development, 24-year development cycle, they're producing radioactive stem cells and radioactive hormones for their whole development. So, but if they make it to adulthood, they're going to have debilitating illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. And it's because your body's not designed, right, to process anthropogenic man-made. It's not from the solar system. Your body doesn't know what it is, and it treats it as a foreign object, rather. And so this is important. This is why I have a poll tonight talking about should nuclear power plants or nuclear weapon sites or reprocessing facilities or nuclear dumps, etc., anything to do with anthropogenic man-made fuel cycle, anything that's gone through a fuel cycle, the emissions from it, because once it goes through the fuel cycle, it's a perpetual machine, and there's no laws to hold them accountable. And so if you look at radiation therapy, and we'll do that maybe right here, should nuclear plants be declared biological weapons due to perpetual fuel pool radioactive fallout? And so every year you're putting more fuel into the fuel pools, and there's 1,000 of them worldwide. And so now each year you're producing more emissions from that fuel pool. And next year there's more emissions again, and those emissions never go away, right? Like, it's not like the fuel stops splitting atoms in a million years. And they're not trying to contain it. And so it's always been in the open. Every nuclear power plant, except for a few worldwide, is surrounded by farms. So when you see the worldwide major media, this is ABC's Cecilia Vega, she's current press club at the White House. BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes, CBS Seth Dorn, as senator's son. This is just a fraction of the media that done this. CNN, pretending that they're 150 feet above the stump of reactor 4, which is still officially is this building here. But how can it be that building and this building? The fuel pools and the reactor cores were at the top of the building. So you can't put a top on a building and then say everything, you're getting the fuel out of a pool, right? Which is what they had done. In the number 3 reactor, where the work will first begin, the number 3 reactor, which is that reactor to your left. Well, there is no fuel pool, there is no reactor core left in the building. It actually ejected the reactor core and the fuel pool right out of the building. I'm going to play that little short video because you can actually see the fuel pools and reactor cores falling back down to Earth. Right, so this is a slow motion. And now this was the containment itself is at 1,000 pounds per square inch. So after a couple of days, see that was the fuel pool and reactor cores falling back down. And what happens is it needs 4,500 tons of water a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. It needs 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks a minute. Think of 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks going past your front door each minute. Impossible, right? So think about the energy it takes to do something like that. So they depend upon 2 gas, oil, and coal plants to run each of these nuclear sites dedicated to them, which works out to 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks of water a day to cool each reactor building, not each site. So each reactor needs 6,450,000 one-ton pickup trucks that have 1,000 liters on it, 2,200 pounds in Japan's case, dumped. The numbers are astronomical, how much water it needs. When it doesn't get to water, the heat buildup, because the containment vessels are already at 1,000 pounds per square inch, will quickly increase, and that's the explosion. Now, the official story is it's a hydrogen explosion, right? And the official explosion, the official version of Reactor 4 is that never happened, that it actually looks like that, which is absurd. And now that, in 2021, they said the same thing about that. And sadly and terrifyingly, nobody else is telling this story. And so I've been under siege for a very long time. And I got a really thick skin, but there's something else going on out there that I wasn't quite aware of, but I think I'm starting to understand. There's another entity out there working to destroy me, and particularly my reputation. And it looks like they've done a pretty good job to me. Unfortunately, we don't have the options of stopping, and it's difficult to figure out. Okay, let me go backwards for 1 second. There's Operation Long Jump. Let me play that video. This was the Japanese government announcing, they called me up on my live show and a number of times, right, and told me about Operation Long Jump and that they wouldn't want to be me. And I didn't really appreciate what Operation Long Jump was. So we were doing, I was studying and we got some more bad news today. There's another research area that I study, because I drive past it regularly, where there's a colony of seagulls and kittiwakes, which are like miniature seagulls, but they're actually not like seagulls. They're not seagulls, but they're their own species. And there's an island where there's typically 1,000 to 2,000 of them on that island, and it's an accessible area, right? And they're gone. I drove past it today, and I stopped and went back. I couldn't believe it. Because a couple of days ago I noticed it. Now in the spring, early spring, they were there, but they're typically there all year long. It's a protected bird sanctuary too. And they're gone. I don't know where they're gone. I don't know how they can be gone. I don't know where they would have went, because they would be raising their fledglings right now, right? And we studied the fledglings on this group, where there was only about a 4 to 6% survival rate. And there was 3 species out there. The kittiwakes didn't lay any eggs. And so there was no survival rate there. They didn't even, well, they might have laid the eggs, but the eggs are on these cliffs, these really tilting cliffs, like on a weird angle, and they'll lay them on the inside there. So they're very visible from the ocean, for instance. And we noticed they had no babies in the nest whatsoever. And then there was the cormorants, and the cormorants don't belong here. Right? And they've never been indigenous to the East Coast. But they had the best survival rate, which is around 16, 18% for the babies. And because they dive deep, they had, unlike a seagull, which is pretty dependent upon the tidal zones. And anytime you've seen the seagulls, they're getting food from the fish plants. That's how they're feeding their fledglings. But to have that island disappear with no birds, every day when I drive past, there's 1,000, 2,000 seagulls maybe. That's my estimate only. And there's nothing on that island this week that I can see. I've never seen that in all the last number of years that we've been doing the research down here. Okay, so Calm Down Charlie is going to call into the show here, and Stinkfoot, Thunderfoot, Phil Mason, who's a very big popular nuclear scientist YouTuber, has been recruited by the Japanese government to destroy me. And I always put the picture of him with the shoe bomber, because you got to admit they look a lot alike, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video. Now, I got a bit of a potty mouth. I don't know if anybody ever noticed that. I didn't realize what Calm Down Charlie meant when he said that Operation Long Jump. Now, he's called in before, but he was announcing it as officially up and running. And Operation Long Jump is the Japanese government is going to destroy, I'm assuming, my reputation. Now that I understand, now I have the luxury of hindsight. I thought he was going to have Phil Mason just make a video and come out and attack me. But when he used Phil Mason to figure out how to best attack me in Canada, in my communities, and make sure the communities, if they came across me, this is what I'm assuming that was taking place, and apparently that is what happened to me. So I'm going to get my big head out of the way. I'm going to play this video, and because the guy who's calling in has been harassing me for over 10 years, particularly on the research, right? And he would, for many years, it was every show he would call in and disrupt the show. And I let him do that because I wanted people to appreciate the pressure that I was under. But this is different. He's announcing Operation Long Jump, which is an operation by the Japanese government, the intelligence agencies, to destroy me. But I didn't realize until recently that there's another entity out there that is also doing it to me. And so my heart is broken this week, because I come to the realization, because I got a stalker, and I actually got footage of the stalker's vehicle now. And it's not the first time I've seen the stalker, and I was confused, right? I think I just don't want to accept that they're doing this to me. I'm not a bad person, and so it's hard for me to accept this is happening. Oh yes. Now see, because this camera, the aperture is, I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. I'm going to play that video, get my head out of the way, and this is self-explanatory. I'm talking about my research with the camera from the land there. I can see the birds too if I can't get out there in bad weather, for instance. And Calm Down, the guy we call Calm Down Charlie, Yoshida Shada, Chicago Division, calls into the show and announces Operation Long Jump. And I didn't really take it serious. That was a big mistake. And here we go. Oh yes. Now see, because this camera, the aperture is stuck open. I can't do pictures. I can only do videos. And if I accidentally click a picture, I have to take the lens off, restart the camera, click a picture. That'll leave it open. Turn the camera off, then put the lens back on, and only use video, right? So when you're zoomed way in over to that island, because that's one of our study groups for field studies, and it's good enough, like ideally, the theory was I could shoot the video. I think that's Calm Down Charlie. Should we give it a try? Hello.
Oh, Mr. Dana.
Who's this?
Yoshida Mashada, Tokyo Bureau. How are you?
Is this the Tokyo Bureau Chicago Division?
Indeed, yes. Mr. Dana,
how do you like
we
my-
want to
how
tell
do you-
you about a new...
How do you like my T-shirt I got
We
for
want to
you?
tell...
Do you like my?
We want to tell
do you like my
about
T-shirt?
a friend of Tokyo Bureau.
Do you like
we
that?
tell you about friend of Tokyo Bureau.
You fuck Tokyo Bureau.
He
Fuck you
knows
too,
a lot
you piece
about
of shit.
radiation
You shut
and
your
nuclear.
pie hole.
He know a lot more than you.
Who do?
You stupid man. He a friend of Tokyo Bureau, and he is instrumental in helping us launch Operation Long Jump.
How do you spell that?
Operation Long Jump.
How do you spell
Mr.
it?
Dana.
How do you spell it? How do you spell it?
Huh?
How do you spell that? Long jab.
Huh?
Long
What
jab?
you say?
You say long jab?
Long Jump.
Long jab.
No. Operation Long Jump. Get it right, Mr. Dana.
Long jab?
Long Jump.
Did you order one of my T-shirts I made for you? You probably got the pink. You probably got the pink one, right?
Stop avoiding the situation.
What do you want, scumbag?
With Tokyo Bureau advisor and friend,
Yeah.
Mr. Thunderfoot, you're gonna be finished. You're gonna be finished, Mr. Dana.
Yeah, I'm all shook up, eh? I'm so scared of you.
You should be. Oh, I would love to be in your shoes. Oh, you make me sick.
Hey, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Okay, sit tight, Mr. Dana.
What are you going to be when you grows up?
Sit tight. We'll be with you soon.
I heard.
See you later, Mr. Dana.
What are you going to be when you grow up? I heard you're going to be a big prick just like me. Which means you haven't got far to go, actually, do you? So there's an interesting threat. They're going to come out and challenge me, are they? That should be fun. Get your Calm Down Charlie T-shirts. We got other colors besides the pink. You got blue and green. And we got other shirts there. So you got a nuclear Save the insects, ban nuclear powers. Save the whales, ban nuclear powers. Pro-nuclear is a hate crime. I got a lot of T-shirts. And we were selling tons of them. Then all of a sudden we sold none. And I can't remember the last time I sold a T-shirt. But we sold tons. We probably, I don't know how many we sold. It's an absurd amount. Terrorists. These people are terrorists. But it turned out it was way worse than I thought. I just thought Phil Masson, who's notorious for being, because he got over 1 million subscribers, right? Thunderfoot rather. These are vile people we've dealt with over the years, right? They're very good at what they do. I can get a bit of a potty mouth, but well, I mean, Calm Down Charlie's been stalking me for a decade. It's over a decade now. They don't like me at all. I don't blame them. I'm not a very nice person to the nuclear industry, that's for sure. I'm fighting for the planet. I'm fighting for everybody on every species on this planet. And I'm doing it by educating the population of the horrific legacy of the nuclear industry and its incredible, unbelievable, harmful effects upon every species, every human. So there's nobody escaped the radioactive fallout on the entire planet. No species, no human, particularly after Fukushima. And the radioactive fallout in Newfoundland and Canada and the United States and Alberta and China and everywhere else is catastrophic. 200, because you can't find it, like my Geiger counter up there is not going to see the 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter of rainfall. But it's not going to go away for 150 million years. It's got a 15 million year half-life. There's 10 half-lives, for instance, right? It's not going to, it only detects and barely does that like gamma, which is the numbers you're seeing is gamma. These, by the way, are incredible high numbers of gamma. It's not going to see the 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air increase of what it was pre-Fukushima, which is the French government study, showing that spike of 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. And so there's a town not very far from me where a couple of years ago, in a period of a couple of weeks or a month, whatever it was, there was 5 people, young people in their 40s, or around their late 30s and early 40s, dropped dead from heart attacks, which is quite similar to the things that were happening in Japan. Japan has a street where 7 people dropped dead in the first year in Fukushima City, Fukushima Prefecture. Okay, let's go backwards for a second. So, in number 3 reactor to work, well, this is a crazy story. A special device in reactor 3 inserted from above the reactor, which, by the way, doesn't exist, right? The reactors were at the top of the buildings. These were 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story buildings. These were skyscrapers. And the reactor core and the fuel pools were at the top of the buildings, the top 80 feet, say, right? Because the fuel pools are quite deep. They're all gone. So a special device, who knows what that is? Because first off, the buildings don't even exist, right? They put a contraption over to manipulate the population. Very successfully, they did. Will be used to crush the solidified fuel debris. One of the problems is that if you crush the fuel, right? Because you're talking about neutrons and gammas, alphas, and betas. And there's an absurd amount of X-ray going on too. Because the neutrons, betas, alphas, and X-rays, or gammas, pulsing energy at the speed of light, they don't mingle. The gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas do not mingle the energy that's pulsing almost at the speed of light. When they hit each other, they slam into each other almost at the speed of light, and they change direction. It's known as a braking effect. The Germans call it a Bremsenlung effect, which that's who discovered it. And it's a braking effect. We call it an X-ray. So all the species, post-Fukushima in particular, are getting full-body X-rays because we have all these emitters. We have the documents of it being here. And now Canada, of course, is incredibly pro-nuclear. It's sickening how pro-nuclear Canada actually is. And the Canadian reactors are the tritium reactors, tritium snuff machines for the species. They can't contain the tritiated emissions, the water, because it tritiates the water from the neutron bombardments. And so Canada legally releases just a single reactor more tritiated water than almost all the reactors on the planet combined, the CANDU reactors. That's a technology that should never exist. But the tritium 3H is important for the nuclear weapons. They have to replenish it every 12 years, or less than 12 years, because the tritium has a half-life of 12 years. And so they'll replenish it by year 9 or 10 in the nuclear weapons, which makes the weapons much more powerful, but you can't use them. You should build the weapons without the nuclear itself in it, because you're not going to use it anyway, right? What's the point of using it? You can't cash your checks no more worldwide, so there's no incentive to use it. Will be used to crush the solidify, but it's a big hole in the ground where they just pour money, particularly Canada, United States, and the pro-nuclear communities, right? There's no limit. They'll get what they get the same gigawatts now as we had in the 90s. They have all the money in the world, but they can't. There is no nuclear renaissance because they steal 90% of the money through administration. Particularly like the Superfund sites that will never be cleaned up. Will be used to crush the solidified fuel debris into small pieces. If you do that, you're going to have a chain reaction. Like, you can't do that. Science doesn't work that way. And there is some fuel, but it's not something they're going to be crushing. It's not like they're talking about the reactor cores. They're alleging they got the fuel pools out of that in 2021, right? Simply, and we covered it extensively. However, it has emerged it will take 1 or 2 years to verify whether the method is even feasible. Right? So it's a conjecture, it's an opinion. And you can't crush the fuel because you can start a criticality event. An earthquake can cause a criticality event for the same reason. So crushing it with a machine, I don't know why they printed that story, because I guess they're insane anyway. Clearly, this industry is insane, but technically, you can't crush up the fuel. Like, if let's say there was like the so-called Chernobyl elephant foot, right? Which is the fakest thing you'll ever see. Because you're talking about like 100 tons of fuel, but the elephant foot is like the size, you can put it in the back of a pickup truck. And that's allegedly the Chernobyl reactor core is solidified, right? The reactor core, if it did have those particular attributes, would be incredibly huge. And you couldn't survive. It's a Medusa. If you look at it, it'll kill you immediately just from the neutron, the brutal gamma shuns, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the massive X-rays from the bulk of the material. So this was the plutonium mixed oxide reactor, the decades reactor cores at the top of the buildings. And so in 2021, this was the media representatives will walk on top of number 3 reactor building. So they put this contraption over reactor 3. We covered that extensively last night, by the way. Right, but underneath that contraption they put over, this is what was there. And the only reason they left the stump there was so they could hoodwink humanity with this particular stuff. Now, we came out and bludgeoned the media extensively when they had that big campaign, right? That big public relation campaign to push that story out there. And demolish an adjacent structure. Now, we covered that extensively last night. So this is a good piggyback off last night's story. So the contraption, here, look at this picture first. So up there is allegedly the fuel pool, right? That's allegedly the fuel pool. And this is allegedly dam at the fuel pool above the stump over there inside that contraption. This was allegedly dam. That was Rupert Winfield Hayes from BBC. So it's confusing, don't get me wrong. But if that was true and it looked beautiful inside of it, why didn't he clean up all the roofs, all the materials? Why didn't he, which is at ground level, why didn't they just gut that piece right there, for instance? Look at, in the yellow, you can see the debris from the nuclear meltdown. The remains of the support buildings, right? There was a bunch of support buildings. So you can't go in reactor 4. Reactor 4 doesn't exist, but that entire infrastructure was built off-site and then assembled there by cranes. And if there was humans, it was the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, the immigrants that don't speak the language, and they would have died that day, right? Their organs melt and a lot less radiation exposure than what you're going to get if you were... And you notice all of these pictures, you're not seeing any human activities, right? You're not seeing any scaffolds, you're not seeing any safety rails, any walkways, any workers' compensation system set up to protect the employees. because it was all done with remote control cranes, and all the debris was left there. And what you ended up seeing was, and I doubt if you ever seen that picture. Right, I only seen that picture yesterday myself, and I've got probably the biggest collection on the planet of Fukushima material. But this one, you remember this story from 2021. This was the 10th anniversary, where the alleged got all the fuel, and this was all the mainstream media, out of a building that didn't exist anymore. It's a pretty neat trick, right? The method of managing the debris to be removed from the reactors has not yet been determined. Regarding reactor unit 1 and 2, the company says we'll start considering the removal process in the future. Now, all the reactors, and we're going to cover that, all the reactors have lost their entire inventories, which total could be 36 massive reactor cores or way more. According to the professor, and we know this anyway, Frank von Hippel recently, videos I've been playing, from March 16, 2011, he was suggesting up to 10 reactor cores at, 8 reactor cores at the top of each of the reactor buildings. But because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan, all the inventories kept, the reactor cores / inventories are kept at the top of the buildings. The stance of the Japanese government TEPCO is difficult to understand. They maintained a completion date. Now, this was a sample, less than a gram, which is that song I started off with tonight, by the way. It's just such a beautiful song that the only way to describe that song right there is pretty clever, man. It's a beautiful song. Less than a gram. However, even decommissioning a normal reactor takes about 30 years. Well, 60 years for a lot of the reactors. They're given 60 years to decommission. And you can't decommission these reactors, by the way. You just move the nightmare somewhere else. If the removal of the fuel debris, the meltdown, fuel debris, meltdowns, is an unprecedented accident with meltdowns occurring in 3 reactors at the same time. Well, if you don't count reactor 4, it's 3 reactors. But you got to count the fuel pools because they were at the top of these buildings. This is the stump, the ghost of reactor 4. There's nothing left. You're not going in the building. You're not going around the building. The debris is there because you can't get within proximity to it. They put remote control crane on the roof of it to slowly dismantle it with nuclear meltdowns. They're very careful. It's very rare to see a media string nuclear meltdown together. There's a reason behind it, right? Because it's censored worldwide. Occurring in 3 reactors at the same time. It's 4 reactors. Clearly, reactor 4 is gone. That's their official picture. Now they claim that never even happened, and that the journalists were on top of, and everything was hunky-dory. The reason they do it, they don't want to be blamed for breaking the food chain and destroying the biosphere and the ecosystem, which is who it should be attributed to. And the die-off of all the species was clearly associated with Fukushima, right? We've covered this extensively for many, many years. And the research expeditions to Alaska for 6 years, that documentation, how do you deny that stuff? Even work to remove a tiny amount of debris proved difficult, was delayed by about 3 years. The mechanical claw, all it done was this, cost $48 million. And they allegedly lowered it down in the reactor 2 and grappled to try to find something and then brought it back up. The problem with that is you put that down in a nuclear meltdown environment, when you bring the claw back up, it's so radioactive, anybody tries to retrieve anything close to it is a lethal dose. You can never get near it again. But we made fun of this when there was a big push on it a number of months back, that all they had to do with the mechanical claw was put a bunch of duct tape on it, and the duct tape, because they brought up less, it was like 0.3 of a gram. And they spent $48 million to get 0.3 of a gram. The idea of all that is a distraction, by the way, from what's really already happening, see? They want you to think about what might happen, but it's already happened. And if they don't do their job, this could happen or that could happen. But all of that is what happened. And so if you put duct tape on the claw, you would get all your samples at one time, instead of going back multiple years to get up less than a gram. The story's crazy. It's so convoluted and complicated, and the industry has made it impossible for anybody, it's just crazy that we don't have anybody, any whistleblowers from the industry coming out and saying, yeah, Dana's right, the fuel pools are, they don't have to even mention it, saying the fuel pools are gone. We do have the legacy headlines acknowledging that, but all of that information has escaped, the conscious. Some estimates calculated that it will take over 100 years. No, you can't get back what's already gone. And as I showed you, some of the models and studies of the radioactive fallout earlier, different isotopes, covers the whole planet 20 to 30 days. All the studies acknowledge that. We have an endless amount of studies of different countries acknowledging the radioactive plume showing up in their countries. Like Canada was 20 million particles of iodine 131. You can't be 131 unless you pulse energy every second at the speed of light. And they covered up that study. But 20 million particles per liter of radioactive fallout is 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133 iodines. The 132, 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing, radiating the thyroid glands of all the species. Residents have started returning to the local municipalities, not because it's safe, but because they're complacent and they've been hoodwinked and betrayed and fed a lot of straw man arguments, and mostly complacent and illiterate. And so they've been, and there's incentives to move back into the nuclear wasteland. I mean, a lot of the people, you're telling me they picked up 30 million one-ton bags where they spent $48 billion at 100,000 atoms per kilogram minimum for the bags. And they're only measuring gamma, so who knows how much alpha's in the same samples, and neutrons and betas and everything else. It's truly unbelievable. What? And another question that you're stuck with is, why would you build these big, huge, massive nuclear reactors less than 100 miles from the tectonic plates, where you have a 3,000-year history of tsunamis up to 300 feet high, and you have at least 1,000 significant earthquakes off the coastline, and you have the whole country infrastructure is designed for earthquakes because they have so many. And where you have a lot of fault lines that have been dormant maybe for thousands of years. And in 2024, January the 1st, the fault line in Shika nuclear plant, the prefecture, the Ishikawa prefecture, on the east side of Japan ruptured. Right, there was like 1,500 landslides and 1,600 after shock earthquakes in the first couple of weeks. There was hundreds of people died. There was a tidal wave. The ocean floor was raised up 13 to 16 feet for about 70 kilometers, up to a kilometer offshore. The 6 harbors dried up. That was a 3,000, 3,500 year dormant fault line that ruptured, that became active because they're on the tectonic plates, the so-called ring of fire. But Fukushima, why would you build your tsunami where you know unequivocally, and the prevailing winds do blow right to Canada, United States, and then eventually right around the entire planet. And let me show you one of those depictions again. So, I already got the most hated job on the planet. Everybody hates me. Not everybody, but anybody. The nuclear industry hates my guts because I remind them that they're not good people, I guess. This plume model is based on 23 days of radioactive fallout. It's not a model, it's a study of 10 million atoms of what it was pre-Fukushima of cesium-137. This is the French government, the IRSN. And it's an accepted, there's many other studies that quantified their assertions, by the way, right, from different institutions. These are the major shakers and movers. That's the Medusa Reactor 3 detonation over there. The lack of a clear outlook for decommissioning will present an obstacle to regional recovery and rebuilding of life. You can't go back to a nuclear wasteland. I'm going to show you some of these headlines for a second. There's two of them right there. And rebuilding the lives. Why would you go back into a nuclear wasteland? Like, United States, Washington coastline, I'm guessing Bellingham, places like that. The Xenon-133, which travels with uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, everything else, in Washington was 450,000 times above detection levels after Fukushima. It was persisted for weeks. It persisted for weeks. There was a continuous plume covering the whole planet. It's not just Washington, right? The plume didn't just stop at Washington. Radioactive fallout doesn't respect any borders. Another study was very high, and it's the same plume, very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest during April and May, including plutonium and americium. Very hot. Now, this was Ernie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott, who Ernie Gunnarsson made the assemblies, the racks for the fuel assemblies for 70 identical reactor buildings in the United States. And the racks holds the fuel assemblies of the reactor cores when you take it out of the reactors. So he made the racks for the fuel pools for 70 buildings, so 140 racks, 140 fuel pools. Now, what's interesting about that, I'm going to play a clip of Ernie Gunnarsson. We got a lot of this, and Helen Caldicott. And now he's put on a pedestal as one of the authorities for nuclear fallout, Fukushima, etc., etc. There's that reactor. Oh, this one. No, not that one there. Here, hang on here. I'm going to get the headphones on. So we're going to play Ernie Gunnarsson now. Ernie says the reactor looks like that, 150 feet above it, but it looks like this. Now, Ernie's he's a smooth operator. He's married to, his wife was a pro-nuclear spokesman for 20-something years. I might have to adjust the volumes. Okay, let's try it.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So he built the fuel racks for the fuel pools. So he knows where the fuel pool is too at the buildings, right?
And Unit 4
now that's his wife.
has always been my biggest concern.
She shakes her head.
If you watched our website,
so if it was
on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
And he shows you that picture in his video. Now, I put these two pictures in the background. That little frame there is the original video from Ernie Gunnarsson, Fairwinds, right? But there's zero possibility Ernie Gunnarsson looked at that and didn't say 3/4 of the building was missing. He come out and told you that he was concerned about it. He would evacuate Tokyo, which is 36 million people. And that's what they should have done. And Prime Minister Nato Khan also made those same assertions, right? We have that documentation. Okay, so then there's Helen Caldicott. Now, Helen Caldicott was asked, does the building, and the video pictures will get better because it's just a freeze frame of the video, but the pictures will get better in a second. The square frame up there is Helen Caldicott. She was being interviewed, so the original videos, that square one up there where she's told, a picture of her. And this was an alternative media, asked her the question, and I put these two pictures there, did the building look like that, or did it look like this? And she says it looks like that. I'm going to turn the volume down and then come back up because I screwed up the last one.
Let me ask you this. You said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
So, but it doesn't work that way, Helen. It can't just magically look like the building to your left. Just hang with me for a second. It's crazy. The whole story's crazy. I'm just looking for something here. I'll be with you in a second. Or less. One more try. Let me try typing. La 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 la. Oh yeah. Remember Josh, YouTuber who went down to the Fukushima prefecture? Remember that guy? Anybody? Where's Dina to? This guy went down into the nuclear wasteland with no safety equipment, and because he was so gullible, Japan gave him access to it, and he went in there and claimed everything was okay, right? There's a lot of people like that. They were paying tourists money to share pictures on Facebook and that. The retrieval of fuel debris is key to the decommissioning, and the fact that it has faced major delays suggests there is a need to reconsider the schedule. Like, you can't recover fuel from a building that covered the whole planet and ejected the reactor cores out of the buildings, for instance, and allow residents to foresee their futures. Well, I mean, they're growing. This is just 2 depictions from the mainstream media in Japan of pictures of 1-ton bags. Remember, they picked up 30 million of these 1-ton bags in a nuclear wasteland. And you see people harvesting rice, and it's harvested for food. And the reason I say that is because they're not wearing their stupid paper suits, which are pointless, by the way. But it would indicate that it's not for sale, right? The fact that they're not wearing the paper suits, and this was in the Japanese media promoting food from the nuclear wasteland. They never stopped growing food in Fukushima prefecture. And 55 countries banned the food in 14 prefectures for a decade. Around 20 still bans it today, but Canada wasn't one of those countries. We removed all restrictions after 93 days. Canada's pro-nuclear. So Japan was growing food in a nuclear wasteland, couldn't ship it anywhere, except for a couple of places. Canada was one of the biggest places. And another trick they were using, they were shipping it to other countries, didn't have a restriction, repackaging it, and then shipping it to countries that had a ban on Japanese product. And they got caught out of some different countries for doing that, by the way. South Korea, Taiwan. Public anger forces Assembly to ask member not to post on X. So this was an independent politician, and she was posting, tired of receiving a flood of complaints and even bomb threats, the City Assembly here on August the 4th passed a gag order on Megumi Fukushima from posting on social media as an Assembly member. She was asking the people not to harass tourists. The Assembly adopted a resolution by a majority vote requesting that. This is Assembly member where they took her freedom of speech away from her, or tried to, requesting that the Fukushima refrain from mentioning her elected position in her postings. She posted messages. This terrible lady posted messages saying she opposed discrimination against foreigners. What a criminal! That's terrifying that somebody would do that. You're not allowed. She said you shouldn't oppose. She opposed discrimination because Japan is notorious for discriminating against foreigners and women. I mean, if you look at what they do to the women, it's pretty sick. And I will not tolerate hate against foreigners on social networking sites such as X. I will not tolerate hate. And for that, she had her freedom of speech taken away from her by the Assembly, or they tried to. I don't know if they succeeded. 44 was first elected to the 18th seat, I'm not trying to pronounce that name, in 2023, and did not belong to a political party. She's totally independent. Good on her. If I remain silent here, it will only benefit those who cause harm. This is not just my issue alone. On the evening of July 22nd, a message threatening to kill Fukushima, Mrs. Fukushima, and bomb the city government office was received, prompting the prefectural police to begin an investigation. Due to the disruptions, the city assembly canceled an August the 3rd event planned for elementary school students in the city to experience and learn about the city assembly system during their summer vacations. The resolution, which is not legally binding apparently, so why would they do it in the first place, stated there's no intention to restrict her freedom of speech, but that's exactly what, there was an intention. Like they can't legally restrict it, but that the intention was to bully her by having her own so-called, the people she's working with vote against her, to silence her and stop her from saying. So the council thinks it's okay to discriminate against the foreigners. And if you discriminate against the Japanese, so if there's a Japanese visitors here where I'm to, and I discriminate against them, I'm getting arrested, right? Going to jail for it, and they're going to plug my face everywhere and everything else. I might even do documentaries about a terrible person I am because I discriminated against somebody else, right? But Japan has no respect. And they're shipping food from a nuclear wasteland and poisoning, because each prefecture, there's 14 prefectures that are still banned by 20 countries. And it should be banned forever. She never removed the restrictions. Radioactive fallout never goes away. And there is no safe level. You get a single atom, and you got a lot more than that into you. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. That's a cause and effect. Right? So it's a biological weapon is the best way to describe it. Serious impacts on citizen safety at work of the city administration, city assembly have occurred. Yeah, well, what about the victims that are visiting? Japan has been using some pretty dubious public relation campaigns to get people to come to Japan, basically to eat the radioactive food, which is promoted in the hotels and the restaurants, which is where the visitors are going to be eating, right? And requested Fukushima, well, the whole story is insane, what they're doing to humanity and the species, and request that the Fukushima refrain from expressing opinions using her official city assembly title. But isn't it her job to like, shouldn't the whole assembly be supporting her, right? Because you're getting a bad image, reputational damage, so to speak. Chair of the Assembly said threats of murder and bombing are unacceptable. Yeah, but isn't threats to... The only reason they're getting threats is because they want to continue demonizing visitors. What kind of culture promotes that? Because that's what the Assembly, except for that one single incredibly brave lady who hopefully gets the Nobel Peace Prize for doing what she's doing. It is a given fact that the resolution not intended to limit Fukushima's political activities. Well, what was it for? Since June 1st, I've asked Mrs. Fukushima to exercise self-restraint as the chairperson, and she did not comply. So the City Assembly decided to make an official statement. She did not comply? Isn't that her job, not to comply to the bullies that are giving her country a bad reputation? Isn't discrimination a crime in Japan? And that's a picture of the crazies. Everybody but that one lady. She stood her ground against incredible odds, and the world needs more Mrs. Fukushimas. So the City Assembly here, we don't get too many good Fukushima stories. This is not a real Fukushima story, but close enough for Dana. The City Assembly here on August 4th passed a gag order. That's what they done. They couldn't enforce it, but they passed one, didn't they? Opposed discrimination against foreigners is a crime in Japan. It is not a crime anywhere else, but it's a crime in Japan, the third biggest economy on the planet, which violently discriminates against the female population of the country. The City Assembly here on August 4th passed a gag order on Megumi Fukushima from posting on social media as an assembly member, which is her privilege, and which is her duty to come out and reject the demonization of the foreigners. I hope it is anyway, right? The world's a better place with the people like that. The world is desperate for people like Mrs. Fukushima, right? So then this story showed up today. The cleanup around Fukushima will last another 3 years. I said, well, that's an old story. And you know what that means? When you see a story like this is 12 years ago, show up, it's because they went in and changed something in the story. And when they resubmitted it back to the internet, it had a new URL. And so it showed up as a fresh story, even though it's 12 years old. And because we tendency to look up similar stories, because like a lot of stories, there might be 1,000 medias published that story at that time 12 years ago. And when you see it show up again, particularly with that media, it meant they were redacting something. So normally I would go out and find a similar story from 12 years ago and would go through the paragraph to see what was redacted. This time I didn't. I took another route. That's where we're going to head for now. Fukushima in Japan will last another 3 years, official has said. The cleanup of the area is initially expected to be completed in March of next year. This is absurd. So in 2 years, they expected the whole place to be cleaned up. I think they spent $48 billion alone picking up 30 million one-ton bags, was it? The newest recent numbers that we have. Hi, Kevin. There's Kevin Blanche in the comment section. And Kevin has been just ostracized from the internet for the last couple of years in particular. The censorship on him is, I've never seen anything like that. It's like he doesn't even exist, for goodness sakes. His dad used to take him to protest in his arms, and he's never stopped protesting his entire life. And he's traveled all over the world on top of that protest. He's recognized worldwide. And it's hard to comprehend that he's lucky if he can get 100 views. The Ministry of the Environment said on Monday that the decontamination of the towns around the plant is much more complicated than originally thought. So this must be 2013 or 14, this story. Over 90,000 people can still not return to their homes. The government's latest forecast is for them to return to their counties in 2017. The industry would let them go back right away if people weren't going to drop dead, because that would look bad on the nuclear industry. So the nuclear industry had to interfere. The nuclear industry had to come in and say, hey, you can't put people back there until you do some stuff, because if people start dropping dead, the nuclear industry might not be able to survive. Because, of course, you'll see the headlines, why are people dropping dead in that town that was abandoned for all these years? The industry is crazy. That's the only thing that we can really guarantee you, and it's never going to change unless we have an educated population that is not going to fall victim to it. And unfortunately, I had always felt that if I ran an educational program, even for a year or 2 years, then we would educate a lot of people, bloggers and stuff like that, and there'd be a lot more people out there besides me. There's only like 5 of us really that I know about that's honest. And that includes James Lucid, because James's songs and music is an amazing gift to this planet. I gotta do some fancy stuff for a second, bear with me. I hate glasses with a passion. But it's better than contacts. I should get laser surgery, I suppose, but it's kind of out of my range. You're still gonna need glasses. There we go, I think I got it. One more second. I should have probably got it of the screen before done this. Every once in a while, I'll do something stupid and touch my glasses. Still didn't nail it. So they always you'll always see these connotations. The Fukushima nuclear disaster was caused by the earthquake and tsunami. They're desperate. They want the indoctrination, right? The social engineering machine will never ever produce a story where they don't say that. They don't want you to come to the conclusion that it could happen any other way. Well, just the earthquake caused number 1 reactor in Japan to melt down and blow up. It wasn't a tsunami. It was melting down before the tsunami got there. That's acknowledged by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States, for instance. It's acknowledged by the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency. It's acknowledged by the institutions and universities, even though they deny all of it now. But we still have the legacy media acknowledgements from many years ago. Unprecedented cleanup of Fukushima reactor could take 40 years. December 21st, 2011. So this is the first year. And there was all kinds of these weird stories. So I had done a search this morning on Fukushima. It was a headline. I went out and looked for similar stories. And then I seen all these stories from year 1 to year 4 to year 5 to year 8 to year 11, years later each time. And I decided to go in that direction because there's something different for a change. I was going to do a comparison of the story earlier to see what was redacted, and I never did finish it. A nuclear plant that went into a meltdown. Like, I've never heard pre-Fukushima that kind of framing of a narrative when it comes to a nuclear meltdown. A nuclear plant that went into meltdown. It was actually 4 meltdown reactor. It was 3 running reactor cores, and there was 9 total reactor cores in each of the building. That's the assumption. It could have been a lot more, and it could have been a bit less. But they didn't have a repository to store it, so where would it be if it wasn't at the top of the buildings, which is standard for these particular designs, the boiling water reactor 4 design. A nuclear plant that went into meltdown is a very interesting, not into a nuclear, like they separated nuclear from meltdown. A nuclear plant that went into meltdown, instead of a nuclear meltdown, nuclear power plant had a nuclear meltdown. Sounds kind of weird, I know, but it deserves that prominence because it's a nuclear event. Right? You can't describe it as a coal plant breaking down or a gas plant breaking down or an oil plant breaking down, right? nuclear crisis minister. Japan had a nuclear crisis minister. And of course, Mari Yamaguchi, an associate press. Mari Yamaguchi, as anybody on this site that's regularly here, is well aware, anything from Mari Yamaguchi is the official cover story. And so if the cover story changes, Mari Yamaguchi Associate Press will break the story, and there's like 1900 major medias have spider bots that will aggregate the story, the same paragraph, same picture, the same author at the same time worldwide. And when you see that, and then writers will do the exact same thing with the story, and so you'll have an overwhelming amount of people worldwide that if you mention Fukushima, that's the story that day that they're going to regurgitate. Right? It's called social engineering, and they've mastered it now. There is no dissenting voices. Fukushima, 5 years after nuclear disaster / nuclear meltdowns, it deserves to be called a nuclear meltdown, not a nuclear disaster. And then that should invoke people to try to comprehend what a nuclear meltdown actually is. Because when you put the word disaster, it's not, the radioactive fallout is unlike any other kind of accident. So it deserves a special prominence because of that. 5 years after nuclear disaster, the cleanup has barely begun, which is a far cry from the story from 2011 we just went through with, where they're like, oh, we'll fix it up in a couple of years, right? Well, when you got 5 years down the road, the cleanup still had barely begun because the social engineering was so effective. So it was very difficult to glean anything. But what I was starting to see in these stories was I was starting to get stuff I never heard before. It was part of the equation. It was necessary. In fact, we've seen that picture that picture was in one of the stories last night, right? A member of the media looks at Medusa as if they're really that close to Medusa. It's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous suggestion. And so let's just touch on the poll for 1 second. Should nuclear power plants be declared biological weapons due to the perpetual fuel pool radioactive fallout? It should be fuel pools, but I ran out of digits. Somebody said no. That's hilarious. No, it's definitely a biological weapon, right? The plant operators admitted that only a fraction of the cleanup has been accomplished. Remember, they lost all the inventories in less than 6 days from 4 reactor buildings. It's an enormous inventory because the inventories for 40 years were stored at the top of the buildings. The plant operators admitted that only a fraction of the cleanup has been accomplished, as Japan prepared to mark the anniversary of the world's second worst nuclear disaster. So suggesting that Fukushima is second, what they're doing is they're suggesting Fukushima is second to Chernobyl. On March the 15th, now Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, it was a brand new reactor, it was a small reactor. It's a totally different emissions. It's still terrible. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. So this handout picture was March the 15th, 2011. You had 4 meltdowns in a row. Each of these buildings are massive. The inventories for just a reactor core, and each building was around 8 or 9. A single reactor core inventory was around 100 Chernobyls. I got that song Less Than a Gram, man, drilled into my head now. I love stuff. I can't even listen to mainstream media at all. Like music. No, I play guitar. I do a lot of lead work guitar. And it's just a personal hobby, right? So I when I say I can't stand it, it's not 100% true. But I'm just doing guitar work. I'm not actually listening to the song. I forgot what I was... Oh, okay, hang on here. I need to show you something. that'll matter. What the hell? Again, right? It's madness. Search engine doesn't want to work at all for me today. Here we go. Bingo. We'll get it now. The original reports at the Russia TV just after Fukushima described Chernobyl in comparison with each of the Fukushima reactors. Because I find it very offensive for them to call Japan the second worst nuclear disaster on the planet. I'm going to have to adjust the volume. Let me just check my internal volume. No, the volume.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and in fact the two stations, the two power plants in the Fukushima region produced the world's biggest joint amount of energy. And
so he's talking about, that's Al Leaks, right, from Russia Today. They're talking about the Daini plant and the Fukushima plant together, because these were huge reactors. Each reactor was 100 Chernobyls. In comparison of Chernobyl, because Chernobyl was a graphite, right? These were pure uranium, pure plutonium. Reactor 3 was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. So when they suggest that Japan is the world's second, and all the media will do that, right? If you go to Wikipedia, no matter where you go, they're going to tell you that's called social engineering. It's not true. I mean, the evidence is clear. On March the 15th, you had 4, including the Medusa reactor 3 up there. The radioactive fallout is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. It was worse than that, though, because the doses, internal doses, when you get it in your body, are 3 trillion times worse than external doses. Because when it's still destroying chromosomes, DNA, and cells from outside, your body has to repair every second. But when it's inside your body, it's much more efficient at destroying. And at 50 atoms a kilogram, 50, which is 50 becquerels, 50 pulses of energy a second, for adults and large animals, is permanent lesions to your organs. And so there's an incredible host of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses from that kind of injury. It's a permanent injury. And it denigrates your ability to have a life, your health, your energy. You become more lethargic because you have less red blood cells than white blood cells. And the red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition, and that's permanent. You're under siege for the rest of your life. It's a biological weapon. The most technically complex and dangerous tasks, including locating and removing the nuclear fuel that is burned through the pressure vessels of 3 of the reactors. So I mean, they're very consistent in refusing to acknowledge reactor 4 is melted down. That is burned through the pressure vessels of 3 of the reactors. They're showing people in paper suits, which are pointless. These suits are pointless. And the tanks were built to lull you into complacency to think that the water wasn't getting into the Pacific Ocean. Chernobyl was 600 miles away from the ocean, the Black Sea. Fukushima is right on the ocean. Everything is downhill. Every time you get a typhoon or cyclone, the whole country is washing radiation out into the ocean. All the leaves, all the plants, all the pollen is radioactive. We have all that documentation to quantify these assertions. This is really interesting. High water mark still visible some 40 feet up the side of reactor buildings, which was about the height of the common span fuel pool, which was behind reactor 4 on the same street, which had around 10 million pounds into it or more. We know that the salt water went in that building, and if you dilute the borated water they're using, right, to mitigate a criticality and an unwanted chain reaction in the fuel pools, which is what happened if you don't have boron in there, you're going to have a chain reaction. And you see this picture got nothing to do with the reactor, by the way. It led to the hydrogen explosions in the 3 buildings. These weren't hydrogen explosions. These were pressurized explosions. Because the reactors need 6.5 million one-ton pickup trucks a day. That's the best way to think about it. 6.5 one-ton pickup trucks of water, 1,000 liters each, 2,200 pounds each. And so think about how much water we're actually talking about. I put it in that context because that's how much water we're talking about. If it doesn't get it, it's already at 1,000 pounds per square inch when it gets it. So when it doesn't get it, the pressure rises dramatically. And then the explosion is like a car tire exploding, right? And that's why the video I showed you earlier. And so it's not a hydrogen explosion. So the hydrogen explosion would be a huge flame that would travel. It'd be, it'd be like a bomb going off, right? Kind of an explosion. You would see massive flame. These were pressure explosions, like a tire too pressurized too much and it just destroys the tire. The buildings, a boiler building has been reduced to skeletal girdles and rusted machinery. That's the tsunami had ran through that building. It ran right through the building. Remember, the tsunami was visible, or watermarks are still visible 45 feet up or something. Yeah, 40 feet up the side of it. TEPCO has managed to remove 1,535 fuel rods from Reactor 4 out of the fuel pool. So here's Reactor 4. The fuel pool was at the top of the building. So these people are pretending this is a fraction of them that done it, are pretending they're in the fuel pool, but the fuel pool is about 100 feet, 120 feet above the stump there. The buildings are 19 stories, so there's nothing left in the bottom of that building. If you crawled in there, you're not going to find a light switch or a garbage bucket or a telephone or a chair or cabinet or anything in there that's functional, right? And you're in a nuclear wasteland because you had around 8 or 9 massive reactor cores detonated at the top of that building. On the low hill overlooking the 4 reactors, that's before they put the cover over, pretending that they got the fuel. The meter reads 69, and there's a lot of, in my playlist to really get you up to speed if you're not familiar with the subject. The meter read 69 that will target certain, like the water, the dumping into the ocean. I'll go through all the documentation to prove that simply can't be done. You can't filter radioactive water particulates that you're pouring over a nuclear meltdown, because if you put that stuff in a big tank, for instance, you got all the gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas will accumulate immediately on the bottom, and you'll have a criticality and burn a hole through it, like you did at Mayak, like you did at Hanford, for instance. The meter read 69.3 microsieverts an hour on a low hill overlooking the 4 reactors. TEPCO has set visitors maximum daily exposures of 100 microsieverts. Like, it's absurd to suggest the word microsiever at a nuclear meltdown site. It's absurd to even, because there's 1,000 microsievers in a millisiever, and there's zero possibility you're going to get anything below a millisiever within 100 miles of the site, let alone at ground zero. And we don't know because the homeless are not telling us. But the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language that work there, are never going to be interviewed. In fact, they're discouraged and they're impoverished. Their money is stolen from them. The 100 microsievert limit, tiny in comparison with the exposures of 10 sieverts an hour, was left at Building Unit 2, which is at hundreds and hundreds of sieverts. But this industry tells more lies in a paragraph. We can't keep up with the lies. You can't, and we do. We challenge the lies, and that's what we do. A lot of times we'll take a news cycle, 24-hour news cycle, and challenge the lies. And we challenge a lot of different, not just Fukushima stuff. We cover the entire nuclear industry. The Unit 2 building, where cranes are, and I have to show you the documentation for just about everything, because otherwise I'm a lawyer, right? The Unit 2 building, where cranes are removing rubble and twisted girders from the upper levels of the structure in preparation for the removal of 566 fuel rods. Like each assembly is around, holds 100 fuel rods. Each fuel rod is 18 pounds and 12 feet long. And so we've seen that routine a lot, where they purposely put the words rod there instead of fuel assemblies. And it's not like to suggest that the spent fuel pools, the fuel is only 3% spent. It's splitting atoms for millions of years. It's a perpetual disease factory, it's perpetual machines. And so you're talking decades of reactor cores, 566 fuel rods, or even if it was fuel assemblies, is not even enough for a single reactor. So they're saying the fuel pools were empty, there was nothing there before Fukushima happened. It's absurdness. Unit 2 building. And this is what the industry does. It denigrates the reality in increments over years or decades. And then the final story, which is like 10,000 pounds or something, is it? Yeah, 10,000 pounds. It's absurd to suggest that's what was in the fuel pools. It's absurd. But that's what they're doing. They keep dropping the numbers down. They do it with every facet of this event, right? Humans are still unable to enter the building. Exposure to levels by radiation will be lethal, even with medical treatment. Like just being in proximity to the buildings will melt your organs. Once that process starts, around 8,000 workers work at the site every day. This is a site that was sprayed, first off, with nuclear fuel pool inventories. There's lethal doses. And they've done a lot of mitigation with the homeless on this site, mind you. But there's nothing for 8,000 people to do at a nuclear meltdown. You can't work at on nuclear meltdowns. It's not like an apartment building that had an explosion or anything else, right? It's lethal doses, and it doesn't matter how stoic or brave you are, your organs melt. And once that process starts, you're dead that day or that week. And so anybody that shows any kind of heat exhaustion, any kind of health issues, are immediately fired. They're sent home and never invited back, told to pick up their check next week, and very few of them will live that week to pick it up. And we know that from the monks and everybody, where they give the ashes of the homeless to. And some of these facilities might have, or monasteries might have 800 urns there of the homeless that were incinerated. It's an incredibly cruel industry in every facet of that word. I mean, because every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. How do you get any? How can you possibly get any eviler than that, per se? With those closest to the reactor building still in full body protective suits, and this is paper suits, which is the white ones, and even the Tyvek suits, like they were given secondhand paper suits to the homeless. The whole story is insane that this is acceptable, is going on. There's no checks and balances, and there's no incentive for the industry to not be evil. So, right, because they can't be held accountable, their corporate personhood, they're on the stock market, right? And so you can't put them in jail. There's no incentive not to be evil. And corporate personhood, which shouldn't exist for corporations and didn't, right? It was an amendment to the slavery laws that gave them some of these human rights. It's an illegal amendment, right? And Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black in the 30s had wrote an eloquent dissent how absurd it was that an amendment meant to free slaves from repressive government was being used to oppress a sovereign people, which is me and you and the planet. Taxes used to be, you would tax a company truck or a company vehicle, say if it parked by the beach and blocked access to the beach, which you had free access to. The government couldn't charge you to go to the beach. That was public beaches. That's got changed after corporate personhood. Well, if you parked your car there, they couldn't, as long as you weren't blocking the entrance, they couldn't fine you. There was no such thing as like a no parking zone for me and you. The no parking zones was for corporations. And that was meant to restrict the government from expanding too big. Of course, they redacted these particular attributes and then demonized you and tax the living life out of you so you can't afford. Once you pay your electricity, your food, your lights, your car insurance, everything else, money left over had to go to taxes. There was no money left over for you to poke away, right? That's not an accident. And then they take your taxes and they give it to their cronies and their friends and their interest, and it doesn't benefit the countries. 3 layers of gloves, which is the opposite of what you hired these people originally to do many, many decades ago. The bureaucracy is a true bureaucracy now. Now it has to consume you and everything else in order to continue to expand and exist. And so that's what it does, right? It's completely out of control and is not the way that it was meant to be. 3 layers of gloves, face mask, and respiratory and hard hats. And hard hats at a nuclear meltdown. Wow. These people are insane. By the way, this reactor 1 cover, that's a Kevlar sarcophagus they built around it. Took that down by year 5. Allegedly, they're putting a new one up there. A 41-year-old man was diagnosed with leukemia after spending 12 months at the site. Like 40% of the children are being born with 1 testicle, for instance, in Japan. 14.2% of children, neonates and infants need open heart surgery out of 100,000, 14,200. So cancer across the country, not everybody was diagnosed, not everybody had health care. It was 865,000 extra cancer patients in the first year. That's not just cancer, right? That's going to manifest from the exposures. So the ground zero suggestion is only 1 person, which was a homeless person. And we got a whole folder of people that died at Fukushima, for goodness sakes. Work continues in the paddy fields and gardens in towns such as Nara, which was abandoned for many, many years. But they continue to work in the paddy field, clean up so people can go back and farm it. You can't clean up after a nuclear accident. And they were scraping up the top centimeter. They changed that narrative a year or 2 ago to 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters or something. Because we've been poking fun at it for over a decade. How absurd it is to suggest, take a shovel and go out and try to scrape up the top centimeter of soil. And you'll agree with me. It can't be done, right? And that's what is allegedly in the 30 million 1-ton bags they accumulated, that somehow or another now has been denigrated to 14 million 1-ton cubic meter bags of radioactive fallout at 100,000 minimum atoms per kilogram of just cesium-137. They refuse to acknowledge any other isotope exists for that particular test. They spent $48 billion US on. In the window of a car showroom, a large sign reads, "Don't forget, return to Tomoka," which is an incredibly nuclear wasteland. We didn't think what would happen if the safety equipment did not function as it was meant to. Okamura, which is a pretty... The industry's always worked that way. And because they can't be held accountable. Back at the plant, the company had made better progress with groundwater that's flowing into the basement of reactor buildings. You can't get near the buildings. You can't make progress. They dug a bunch of wells around the site and they're pumping up any water headed towards the ocean. And the intentions of that was simply to test it, not to store it. They can't pump all the water from underneath the site, right? The site was built, it was leveled out with like I don't know how many feet. Some estimates were like 100 feet of shale. And there's a reason. It's built on a riverbed, so if it does melt down, it goes down, hits the riverbed, and it gets washed out into the Pacific Ocean. An all-nuclear plant has that particular attribute. It's called their oh shit plan. The industry is just, it's completely out of control. And I thought, in my infinite non-wisdom, running this educational program, plus I do research expeditions extensively, not so much anymore because we have been ostracized. We don't have the support. We're not Greenpeace, right? Back at the plant, the company has made better progress with groundwater flowing into the basement and becoming highly radioactive. You can't filter it because you can't change the filter. The filter becomes thousands of sieverts in an hour. You're talking about 2.2 sieverts per liter acknowledged of just beta. You can't just have beta in a liter. If you're pumping water up, it's full of particulates and fuel particles. And these fuel particles are splitting atoms forever. You can't put that in a big tank, right? It doesn't work that way. You can't filter it. You can't walk over the hoses you're using. You can't walk over the pipes you're using to transport it. You can't walk in proximity of it without getting a lethal dose. You can't change the filter because even if the filter was 6 feet thick lead, you still get a lethal dose to the people that were trying to change it. How do you change something that heavy, that big, that cumbersome? How can you filter it? And another thing about a filter, trying to like the ELP system, the Siri system, the Riva system, which was exactly like the ELP system that the French government built to manipulate the population, right? They never even turned it on. And the idiot did turn on ELP system, turned it off again. There's no way to decontaminate it or decommission it because you're putting multiple sieverts per liter of water. 3 sieverts to 4 sieverts is a lethal dose in a few minutes in proximity for a human. So when you're talking about running millions of gallons through these things and that they're multiple sieverts per liter, you can't get back in the building. Once the pipes are all lit up, you can't with the material. You can't put it in the tanks because you have a criticality. And if you have an earthquake, because the tanks are all plumbed together allegedly, so they would equalize, see? Which is absurd to suggest, right, that the tanks were built to trick people into thinking that nothing got into the ocean. And if you go to my playlist, you'll see incredible documentation about what was acknowledged as releases in the legacy headlines releases into the ocean. They claimed, and we got 3 more, and then we're up to our limits here tonight. We were not able to prevent the accident from happening because we stopped thinking. No, you didn't prevent the accident because you're a corporate personhood. You can't be held accountable. There's no incentive, right? You know, with a typical charter that's not on the stock market, you can be arrested for what you've done. Your company could be liquidated, and then to pay off restitution, outstanding bills, and for remediation, right? The money would be used that way. And the owners would be in jail. So there was an incentive. They would lose their company, and they would end up in jail. So they would have put in checks and balances to make sure it couldn't happen. But it's not because they felt that they were better or that they weren't paying attention. It was because there was no incentive if something did happen. And they insisted that the chaos from 2011 would not be repeated. Well, how are you going to avoid it? You're on the ring of fire. You're right alongside the tectonic plates where you're guaranteed massive megaquakes and tsunamis. How are you going to avoid it? It doesn't matter how big of a seawall you build, you still won't be able to avoid it because the earthquake will tear them apart. If you get a big earthquake, it'll tear them apart, and the tsunami will do the rest. The accident was partly due to a narrow view of what an accident would be and a fixed view of safety. We know now that our attitude with safety has been better today and better again tomorrow. This is absurd of suggestions. Blatant lies. And that's the daily story of the nuclear industry. Blatant, brutal, sadistic lies. All right, okay. Right, you got 80 years of propaganda. And it's, blatant propaganda where they're actually, here we are, reactor 4.
What I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor.
Like, it's absurd to suggest that they're on top of the building to the left. And the implication is within a short while, within just 30 days, we covered the whole planet with radioactive fallout. I think this model is only based on 16 days, is it? This is the French government. Not a model, it's a study of 1 million to 10 million times pre-Fukushima cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. It's a death sentence for the species. You have all the whales emaciated. All the grey whales will basically be gone in less than 2 years. For the last 2 years, all of them have been severely emaciated. They went from 12 inches of blubber to skin and bones. And all the ones they're finding, the media is trying to blame it like on ship strikes and everything else. But because we cover this stuff all the time, unfortunately, and we have no choice, it's a very unpleasant, it's a terrible story, right? It's a very unpleasant job on top of that. I've been demonized and attacked so much. I expect it. It's been going on for as long as I can remember. But there's something else going on, and I think I worked it out, and I don't know what to do about it. But it's even for the nuclear industry, it's pretty low. There is something else going on there that I wasn't expecting. That recently I think I worked out, and I'm going to have to deal with it. It's just heartbreaking. And they seized upon it by the looks of it. Okay. James Lucid has put out a video last night. We didn't play it because I wanted to listen to nuclear exceptionalism. But tonight we're going to play Radioactive Wasp. And there's a link to that, I'm sure, below it, which is Savannah Riverside, where they acknowledged that they boiled off about 130 million gallons of radioactive sludge into the environment. This stuff we're talking about it's absurdly dangerous for every species on the planet. And we see this all the time, but it's another brutal example of what the nuclear industry, even today, can get away with. If anybody else done it, it would be the crime of the century, right? And we're 2 hours and 15 minutes in. My apologies. That's the way it goes sometimes with me. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Night. Take care.
Out past the fences at Savannah site, a wasp nest showed up on the quarantine site. Pulled from seams of the weapons plant on a pipe left dry where the coolant ran. They saw the count and shrugged it off. Low risk, they said, don't stir it up. Wasps don't know about half-life zones, but they chose the pipe and they made it home. They gave it one dismissive glance, just insects chewing on circumstance. They don't wear badges or read the signs, they only build from what they find. Radioactive wasps don't care, carried waste through the open air. 10 times the limit, classed and hauled, disposed like anything routine at all. They come back every single year, same steel beam, same sealed off gear. No alarm trip, no warning shown, made their home in the blind spot zone. A headline came, no questions faced. The cleanup's quiet once time gets paid, but nature taps what we forget, and nests are built where no second look, just reading spiked where insects took wild deer.